Hello, everybody. I'm Quentyn Taylor from Canon Europe. And I want to talk to you a little bit today about things that I have learned from being a CISO. Now, to be clear here, I'm not actually a CISO, and the reason why I'm not a CISO is in my company, the C in CISO, Chief, is reserved for people on the board. So if you ever see someone with Chief in our company, they're physically on the board. And I personally, and I'm giving you a bit of a hint here, I don't believe that CISO should be on the board in many, many, many companies. But anyway, so this really is going to be a bit of a retrospective on things that I'd have liked to have told my younger self. Because when I went into information security, when I went into IT, I never really intended, of course, I suppose I wanted to become the head of information security, as you always want to aspire to somewhere, but I never really sort of set off to do that. I just kind of like drifted into information security, right place, wrong time. So before I start, or wrong place, right time, I'm not sure which way around that entire analogy works. Who here is a head of information security or wants to become a head of information security? Good, it's a great audience then. Because everything I can tell you, there's no one's going to say, no, you're wrong. Now, the thing to remember as well is a lot of this presentation is personal opinion. And personal opinions can be right, and they can often be wrong. And this can be right for me, but it may not be right for you. So please, just think about that. Don't blindly follow the advice in here. I know you're all very intelligent people and you think for yourself and you won't do that. But just remember that this is personal opinion and this is what worked for me and some things that didn't work for me. And I'll talk about admitting your mistakes. So the first thing I want to think about today is, what is a head of information security? The CISO title gets used an awful lot. And people just bandy it around, and you hear of like the CISO conferences, and you hear about all these things, and people bandy it around without actually thinking about what is it really. And also, people then don't start to think back about what is it that a CISO needs to be, and also who does a CISO need to be. And that, I think, is really, really, really important. And in reality, that despite my stunningly good looks, information security has evolved a lot in my lifetime. And my kind of like remembered lifetime, it's going to shock you this, starts in the early 80s. Yeah, officially I tell everyone I was born around here. Unfortunately, my age, the age I keep on telling people who were born, keeps on moving this way. And when it gets past the mid-90s, I'm feeling for some serious trouble because people are going to say, how do you remember that music? You can't have been born then. I've already had that. I talked to someone about the Los Angeles Olympics and someone said, but you told me you weren't born till 84. And I had this, I've got a very good memory, eidetic memory me. Anyway, so if you think about information security and where information securities come from, and it's very, very interesting to see these sort of ages and what's really happened. Because back here, what did we have? We kind of had digital graffiti. We had MTV releasing the movies and hacking their own website, because hacking your own website was cool. We had people like Max Vision taking over the television network for a certain American city and was never caught. Probably don't know who he was. We then had the age of stealing credit cards. And interestingly, if you steal a credit card has no intrinsic value. You have to go and buy something, sell that thing, and then you can fence it, get some money back. So we really, really had the sort of the TJX Max hackers, the sort of the Alberto Gonzalez people, all in this area here. And then we moved into the golden age of ransomware and then data destruction, which kind of started in 2017 to the modern day. And why did these ages change? Well, they changed for many, many reasons. And I like to think, now, it's very, very easy when people sort of look forwards and start talking about technologies and say, these are the technologies which are going to revolutionize the world. But it's much easier, and I prefer to do this, which is look back and say, which are the technologies that did revolutionize the world? So I'm not predicting anything here. So what did we have? Well, around this time here, around 2000, where we had credit cards, and we had Carder Forum, and we had all the darknet markets, although that's a bit later, but the credit card forums, the golden age of credit card forums here. If you wanted to host, sorry, I'll move off the squeaky bit of stage. If you wanted to host a credit card forum back then in around 2000, 2001, 2002, you had to hide it somewhere on the internet. You had to hide it somewhere, and it was very hard to hide it somewhere because you could just ping the site and go, oh, it's in Brazil, and just call it the Brazilian ISP and ask them to shut it down. And then, of course, things like Tor totally changed that. 3D Secure, MasterCard Secure Code, verified by Visa, and whatever Amex's scheme is, also changed it because it meant that just stealing the credit card, the expiry date, was then absolutely useless if you were following these things. And then also, you've got things like cryptocurrency, and Bitcoin was released 2009. I think it was January 2009 when it came out. So cryptocurrency suddenly meant that if I wanted to make money from people, I don't need to steal their credit cards, then go into a branch of Macy's and then buy some handbags, which is what the Alberto Gonzalez used to do, and then sell the handbags or return the handbags and then fence the money that way. I can actually get them direct. And if you think about many successful companies, what are they trying to do? They're trying to slim down their supply chain. And criminals are just the same, trying to slim their supply chain down. And ransomware is just the ultimate example of that slimming down the supply chain. Sorry, I'm going to move forward because that is squeaky back there. Slimming down the supply chain, it's about saying, well, where are my victims? My customers, if you will. If you're a criminal, they're my customers. Where are my customers and how can I get money from them most effectively and efficiently? Well, if I can just ask them for money, demand money from them, that's much, much more useful. And then, of course, we have the commercialization of crimeware. Now, let's think about where this all has led to. Well, it's led to these particular ages. Now, I like to call these ages the age of mischief, indirect monetization, direct monetization, idealism. Now, one of those ages has disappeared, and that's the age of mischief. And I really, really feel bad for the fact that the age of mischief has gone completely. But indirect monetization hasn't gone, but really almost it's kind of petered out. Direct monetization has really, really exploded, and now we're in the age of idealism. And what do I mean by idealism? Well, idealism is this line at the bottom. It's the nation states getting involved. Now, when I was a child, when nation states got involved and when nation states did their spy things, it generally was somewhere in Eastern Europe, always in Eastern Europe, and it'd be a bridge at dawn, and there'd be a car parked on either side of the bridge, and the doors would open, and two men, always men, would get out and would walk rather furtively across the bridge, and another man would walk the other way, and they would nod at each other in professional pride and get in. And one of them would go off to a life of luxury and the other one would go off to the gulag, depending on how lucky they were. And that's what nation-state interference was when I was a child. But now we've got things like NotPetya, we've got things like Stuxnet. And let's be honest, by the way, I've drawn this line along the bottom as dotted over here and solid over here as nation-states are very, very much involved. And you saw the talk from Kaspersky this morning about the Zeus issue, which nation-state probably based in there. Well, if you remember Stuxnet and the whole issue with PCL controllers being adjusted, back here, there was the largest peacetime explosion that's ever been. And it was in Siberia. And it was where a Russian oil pipeline that was running through, or gas pipeline, sorry, that was running through Siberia had a mysterious problem where all the valves mysteriously shut themselves in an exact pattern that would then cause the largest buildup of pressure, which then actually caused it to rupture and explode. Now, was that nation state? I guess we'll have to wait for, well, the 30-year rule's already over, but we'll have to wait whatever the year rule is before when one of the Western governments actually admits that probably it was them, and maybe they reused that technology over there when they were messing around with Stuxnet. But these ages are what really, I think, have defined where the CISO has come from. So I was doing InfoSec around here. And we were looking back. We were still in the age of the amateur back then. That's how I got in the industry. It was the age of the amateur. You didn't need much IT knowledge. I had a biology degree. And now it's kind of moved forward through IT knowledge. But now we're back to low IT knowledge where you've got the commercialization of the tools. And this really, really then leads it along from this sort of like these ages and really guides what a CISO needs to understand of the world that they are playing in. And when we talk about geopolitical power as currency, it's really important because over here with indirect and direct monetization, I can secure a process by removing the finance out of the process. I can stop someone breaking into a physical building by making it so there's nothing worth stealing in that building that they might want to break into. They're not going to want to take the risk of breaking into it if there's actually no monetary reward. So over here, you can secure your processes by removing any of the monetary reward and make it very hard to get. But this is where this becomes very important, which is, I as a CISO am not in control anymore. I can't give a country back to another country. I can't fix the geopolitical situation. It now means that everything's out of my hands. And that's where the modern CISO is having to think about what they're doing. But before I get on to that, what is the purpose of the CISO? And I often wonder, I mean, people often say that CISO stands for career is so over. But that's an old joke. You don't need to laugh at that. That's a dad joke. But what is really the purpose of the CISO? Is it to be the most technical person in the organization? Not anymore, it probably isn't. Is it to be the thought leader on information security? Possibly, possibly not, I don't know. Unfortunately, an awful lot of CISO's, of a head of security's role is really to try and influence, is to try and change behaviors, is to try and talk to the board, is to try and talk to all levels of the organization to get them to understand what security is and to define the risk appetite and the risk posture. Now that's totally different at the other scale as it was when I first started. When I first started, the head of security was probably the most technical person in the room from a security perspective, because they had to be. And this whole thing about being a CISO is really, really tough. And I'm going to come back to this in a minute. And I blame social media. Because I'm over the age of 30, so I can blame all of life's ills on social media. If only we didn't have social media. Follow me on Twitter, by the way. My Twitter handle's coming up later on. And Instagram, Quentyn Taylor, no dots, no spaces, lots and lots of pictures. So anyway, if you look on social media and you look at CISOs on social media, you'll often see this very, very simple thing. I found an issue, I told operations someone to fix it, and the issue was fixed. And you see these perfect lives, just like if you are on Instagram. You see these perfect lives of people leading perfect places, and they say, oh, yes, I'm here at the Marina Bay Sands, as my Instagram said last night. And it just shows this very much this perfect world and this perfect life. But we know that in real life, things aren't perfect. We know that in real life, you'll find problems, you'll tell operations, you'll find the solution is unsupported, you'll beg someone for money, you'll buy lots of coffee, you'll find out the issue wasn't entirely fixed, you'll go back to one of these points, and you'll keep on running backwards along here till either the problem gets fixed, you get bored, or eventually the whole business unit disappears and therefore it doesn't matter anyway. But that's not what goes on social media. That's what goes on social media, and that's what gets presented at conferences. How many times do people come to conferences and say, I had a problem, I didn't fix it, it's still a bit terrible, I don't know what I'm doing, yeah, I don't know why I'm standing up here actually. How many times do presenters actually say that? No, they come up here and go, I had this problem and I trained all of my staff and they were perfect and now they don't do it ever again. And you know that in the real world, in the real life, that's not how things go down. But that's how people perceive things, which then leads to a problem in our industry. Because then you get, how many times have you heard on the back of a data breach, instantaneously, the call, predominantly from information security people, for the CISO to be fired? Or you hear on the back of a major malware outbreak, or on the back of NotPetya. Everyone knows NotPetya, the Russian government-developed malware that was designed to take out Ukraine just before their tax was due. And it took out Maersk and Mondelez and lots of other companies as well. Major nation-state-sponsored malware. But if only those companies had patched, everyone says. Yeah, well, if you heard my talk yesterday at the CXO lunch, if only those companies had patched. It's a really easy statement to make if you're running a 30-person company. If you're trying to run things at scale, if you're trying to run above 1,000 machines, 10,000 machines, 50,000 machines, if only they'd patched, well, 1% non-patched machines at 50,000 machines is a huge number of machines, and you only need one to suddenly mean you have a problem. So that whole statement of fire the CISO, if only they'd patched and all this lot, is something that really seems to have really sort of ramped up in the industry. And that's where we used to support each other, and now it seems like some of our adversaries are not the actual people we consider to be adversaries, but our own industry. And I'll come on to that in more. This then led me to this. I was sitting down, and that picture is where I got to. And I was chatting about, effectively, that picture. I was having a little whinge. There'd been some data breach, and I was, someone I considered to be a friend, and I still do consider to be a friend, he was just misguided, has said on social media, the CISO is negligent. He is negligent in what he did here. If I had been the CISO of that company, that data breach wouldn't have happened. And I had a private conversation with him to say, I think you're wrong. Which kind of led me to these four things, which is basically this link to IT, these four hard truths and a revelation. What we're doing, risk-taking, what we're doing with the self-destructive industry, which I've been talking a lot of just now. And then the last one is about transformation, what you can do in this industry to transform the industry. And this is also what you can do in the industry to transform the industry. So let's look at the perspective on the modern CISO. I'm going to use this model. This model, you've got the environment and the transformational parts, and your attitude and your competencies. And I'm going to reference this a bit as we go through, because you can't control the environment or the transformation, but you can control your attitude and you can control your competencies. They're fully within your power. So let's think about the first one. So it's about the link to IT. This is one of these hard truths in IT. It's very common and very modern right now to actually say, I'm a CISO, I'm nothing to do with IT. And you get some people in the security industry denigrating IT and go, they're just IT. I do not report into IT. And I found myself doing this. I find myself saying, I'm sorry business, but I'm not IT. I'm information security. IT are totally separate. But let's be really honest here. I don't believe that you can do a head of information security or a decent security job unless you divorce yourself from IT. But I don't think you can do a good job unless you've worked in IT. I've worked with some security people now who have never worked in IT. And I'll give you a great example. I was chatting to somebody whose name will remain nameless to protect the guilty, and he'd just put a policy statement together, and he goes, I want to push this policy statement out. And I said, well, are you sure the users are going to do it? And he goes, well, sure they will. I'm telling them to do it. It's in the policy statement. They're definitely going to do it. I was like, oh, good God, you need to spend some time on a service desk, because if you don't spend some time on a service desk, you will not realize how creative users can be at getting around things. And I think this is the most important point, which is I insist all of my staff go and spend at least half a day working in IT. They actually, ironically, they have to spend a day working in the business as an absolute minimum, and I mean really working in the business, and many times they'll spend many more than one day. They'll go out with sales teams, they'll go out with service engineers, like fixing people's printers, fixing cameras, they'll go and do this. And I think they have to do that. But the thing I'm now introducing, and I've done for the last 2 years, is they have to go and work in IT, especially if they've never worked in IT. They go and sit on the service desk. And ironically, and this is the funny thing, because one of them said, I'll come to the service desk and I'll answer some calls. And then it turns out they're not actually qualified to work on the service desk, because working on a service desk is actually really hard, and you actually have to understand all the individual systems and how to do all the start, move, and leave process. And so they have to sit there and listen and watch somebody else do it. And they suddenly get an understanding of how hard other people's jobs actually truly are. But this just brings us back to this whole point of, you've got to have, we're working in technology, we're information technology, whether we like it or not, and you've got to have that. This then brings me on to this old-style CISO point. So the old-style CISO, and I mentioned this earlier on before, is about focusing purely on the technology. Now, what does an old-style CISO mean? Well, it means that you have a need to be liked because you're the technologist. You've got to follow the business because you're purely in IT. Notice I'm giving you contradictory opinions here. So then I said you didn't need to be in IT, now I'm saying you need to have some IT. But the problem with this kind of mindset, if you're being thought of as part of IT, you're going to focus on the costs, because that's what IT does. IT costs go down. You've got problems with conflict of interest, so risks can accumulate. You've got IT people saying, I'm sorry, I can't decommission that system because the new one isn't ready, therefore we just have to live with those risks. And you're seeing security as a threat, because security is stopping you from being able to deploy your systems. So where can you go from there? Well, you can actually go to what I consider to be the new style CISO. And this is where you're very much more business-centric and outcome-focused, and you're actually trying to lead the business. You're trying to say to them, you know what, actually, there is a better way of doing these things. Now, that actually then gives you this competitive edge. It means you're focusing in on profit. And this last bit, and I'm going to come back to this about risk-taking. Risk-taking is something that we as information security people don't do very well. And why don't we do it very well? It's because we consider that other people take risks. Oh, no, we just present option A and option B, and we make a recommendation between option A and option B, and it's up to the business to take it. Rubbish. And I'm going to come back to that in a minute. We're not legal. And so it's easy for information security to sit on the fence. And I now realize, in my early career, I literally used to sit there like a lawyer. Remember, anybody here ever been in a court before and actually had to be recommended whether you plead guilty or innocent? No, you all passed the test. No one put their hand up. That's great. I was at a conference once, said something very, very similar to that, and somebody put their hand up. And then later on, I just jokingly said, who had their Ashley Madison account compromised? And the same person put their hand up. I was like, God, you're just ripping my jokes apart here. I can't continue on this. Anyway, everybody's watched enough drama programs to know that a lawyer will say to you, I can't tell you to plead innocent and I can't tell you to plead guilty. I can only tell you the outcomes of both. And that actually is legally true. They can't tell you this. Under English law, I'm suspecting Singaporean law is the same as English law in that respect. But we're InfoSec and we're not the same as that. So we should be able to say, I am part of the business and I should be able to advise you whether to go live with that system, with those security vulnerabilities, or not go live and be trusted. And then share some of the risk. If I'm going to make a recommendation to say to you, do you know what? You're going to have to go live and I see the business need to go live with that. There is this security issue. It might be exploited. These are the controls that I'm going to try and put in place and I'm going to stand with you if it gets compromised. That's a very uncomfortable place to be there for the first time. But if you're going to move on as a security person and grow, and I believe be part of the business, it's a step you've got to take, and you've got to be able to stand there with business people and say, I'm with you. I'm right with you on this. And do you know what? That will breed trust. Because if you sit there and say, hey, it's not my backside on the line, it's your backside on the line, here's option A, here's option B, that's what lawyers do. I'm not trying to denigrate any lawyers, by the way. I love lawyers. I'm legal's business partner. I love all our lawyers. But it's a difference in that they have to remain impartial. As a security person, you have no controls like this. You don't have to remain impartial. You can give an honest opinion as an officer of the company as to what they should do. And you'll find that if you start to take risk with your business, they'll then start to trust you more. And let's be honest here, they're going to do it anyway. So you may as well at least recommend the option that you think is going to be the most sensible for the company. And this then leads, that behavior of us not taking any risk, then leads to this. I want to apologize. I think it was Alex Stamos. I think I might have stolen this slide, or at least the concept of this slide from Alex Stamos's Black Hat thing. So Alex, if you're watching this on repeat, thank you for the concept of this. Now, if you think about where we tend to spend our money, if you look at this, I've got InfoSec cost is on this kind of axis, and the benefit is on the horizontal axis. Where do we tend to spend our money? Well, we tend to spend our money on things like the APT solutions, on keeping the nation states out and everything else. Whereas we tend to not spend our money on getting the patching right. Now, remember I said it's hard to get patching right. Security basics are really, really hard. They are really hard, and it's where you should be spending your money. Because if you look at all of the advanced threats that come along, very few advanced threats are actually based on a 0 day. Most of the big attacks that have come out are not based on 0 days, they're based on something that's already been out there. So why as an industry do we spend all of our money on solutions that we don't know if they're working, we don't know if the threats are actually there? I'll tell you why, because that's hard, and a vendor will help you implement the shiny box that goes all nice and blinky and gives your senior executives a lovely graph. This is hard to get right. That's very, very easy to not get right, but appear to be doing right. And we as an industry need to flip this thing around and say, I am not going to spend my money on the shiny, advanced, expensive tools. I'm going to spend my money on people, and I'm going to spend my money on solutions to get the InfoSec basics right. Which then leads on to my favorite topic, which is this culture of negativity in InfoSec. And we need to break this narrative. Who here thinks that everyone here's red team and blue team? Quick show of hands. Would you like to be on the red team or the blue team? Show of hands for red team. Show of hands for blue team. You know where I'm coming from on this one. If you ask a lot of people where they really want to be, I mean, let's be honest, the red teamers and the black hats, I'm not lumping the red team as the black hats, but the people who have the adversarial culture have got how many conferences? DEF CON, Black Hat, all the various hacking conferences. There's far more adversarial conferences than there are defending conferences. I think someone's just talking about having a blue team conference, and I will support that because I think it's so vital. And we've got this culture that the red team equals cool and the blue team equals boring suits. And I'm going to come on to that in a minute. And this is driven by this kind of behavior. Who don't recognize as every single one of these vulnerabilities and knows what they all are? I'll be surprised if anyone does, because actually there's a couple on there. They're all vulnerabilities, they're all logos that are on vulnerabilities. And it seems to me today that you can't actually get a vulnerability patched unless it has a logo, a website, a theme tune, and a hashtag. And I'm going to blame, and I'm going to go out on a limb here and state that the reason why the recent Microsoft RDP vulnerability has not got the traction in the patching area that it probably needed to do is because it had no logo. Seriously, the Bluekeep vulnerability had no logo. In actual fact, you can thank Kevin Jones for inventing Bluekeep, because that was a bit of a spin on Game of Thrones reference. I wanted Blue Thanos. I thought Blue Thanos was much cooler, but they went with Bluekeep because Game of Thrones was finishing at the time. But it has no logo. How can a vulnerability be serious if it doesn't have a logo? And in actual fact, there's one of these, that one, which had a logo, a theme tune, a website, and a hashtag, had briefed all the journalists, and then someone said, actually, that's just how PGP works. Yeah, that's what we've got. We've got marketing potentially needing to remain a bit separate from InfoSec, and maybe we need to stop worrying about the marketing and start worrying about making an impact on what we're actually doing. I remember I talked about the red team and the blue team. I'm sure everyone recognizes this film. This is the 1995 film Hackers, one of my favorite films of all time. About fifth favorite after The Matrix, Godfather. I'm not going to go through them all, but there's lots of good films. And I watched this a lot, and I love this film. But I love it from the cultural aspect. Because when I watched the film, when I first watched it, these guys were the good guys. And that's Penn Jillette, actually. I think it's his only ever film role from Penn and Teller, the magicians. A very young-looking Penn Jillette. And he was the bad guy. And his boss was called the Plague, who was trying to be a hacker but wasn't really. Rode on a skateboard, so you knew he was a hacker, and had a long leather coat, so you knew he was a hacker. And you wanted to be these people, because these were the cool kids, and he was the bad guy. Show of hands here. Who here has probably more link to this person working in a corporate and working for corporate InfoSec than these people over here who were a bunch of kids who were actually self-funding? Yeah. I heard a really great quote, and I can't remember who said it, but it was on Twitter, and the guy said, all my life I've been fighting the man. And then the other day I looked up and suddenly realized, I am the man. And this is the point, is we all want to be the cool kids, the red team, forgetting that actually what pays for our industry is over here. And forgetting that is really destructive for the industry. It's about biting the hand that feeds. And then this leads to this last piece, which is about how you pay for information security. And often what I see salespeople, and when I say salespeople, information security people in their own organization can be salespeople, and they sell on fear, not merit. If you don't patch that machine, it will get hacked. If you don't upgrade that machine, the bad hackers will get in and all the data will be exposed. Now, am I telling lies saying that? No, I'm not. It's probably perfectly true. But a fear sell doesn't last very long. A fear sell is a very short-term sale. And it's really a demonstration of an immature industry. And I'm going to say the InfoSec industry is an immature industry, because let's be really honest here, the information security industry as an industry that we know it today did not exist much before late 80s, early 90s. There was no real InfoSec industry going back then, as we know it today. And I think that what we need to do is we need to become part of the solution. And actually for me, what did this mean? Well, for me, this means becoming part of the product security piece. I mean, this is not a sales pitch for the company I work for, but if you go and download, for example, the hardening guide for our printers, that was written by my team for people like you. Now, we didn't write it originally by my team for people like yourselves. We wrote the hardening guide for our printers because we use our printers internally, so we wrote our own hardening guide. And then someone said, wouldn't it be good if you could release that to the public? And I said, well, yeah, I don't see any reason why not. And this led to me to a revelation, which is, if you want to be part of that, if you want that world to change, you have to become part of that world that you want to see. And for me, this was about suddenly getting out of my comfort zone of sitting there as a corporate head of information security and saying, I've got customers asking security questions. Who better to answer these security questions than my team? And so now I also run product security. And someone said to me the other day, how did you get the mandate to run product security? And my answer was, I don't know, actually. I just kind of started doing it, and then just people assumed, and then I asked for budget, and I got budget, and then I asked for people, and I got people, and it all just kind of went from there. But that's just about saying, if you want to become part of that world, start to change. And this is where I think that all corporate InfoSec people are going to have to go. And everyone has a product that could be secured. Everyone has customers who may be interested in security or may be interested in the security of your product, whether it be physical product, software product, or services. You have a part to play in your customer's information security story. So let's jump back to this. I talked about this a lot, actually, about the things that you don't control and the things that you do control. And my point here is, don't sweat these top two bits. If you can't control it, don't waste all of your energy trying to control it. But these two bits in the middle, your competency and your attitude, you 100% control that. So take control of that and actually say, what can I do? And I'm hoping that some of the things I've talked about today really, really, really resonate. Because for me, the evolution of myself and my team's role, if I think when I started, because I started at InfoSec in 2000. Next year, I'm about to admit this on camera, next year's my 20th year in Canon. I never ever assumed I would ever get to 20 years. I haven't got to 20 years yet, actually, so I probably shouldn't say this, just in case someone then sees me having a Twitter meltdown and then sort of replays the video and go, he didn't make 20 years. But anyway, so I will make 20 years in Canon. And that's, I think, is quite unusual in the industry. You've got people like Mikko and a few other people who have got like 35 years, but it's very rare to see this long length of tenure in one company. And so I've got a bit of a unique view on what's happened, because I've been able to see a whole company and a whole team evolve and actually undergo many, many evolutions. And so when I first started, it was all about technology. It was technology, it was policy, and telling people, you can't. And that really was my job. I mean, at the time over here, these hard skills were so important. And that's all that was important. And it's not just that information security has evolved, it's that IT has evolved as well. Because now, what are the skills that I look for when I'm hiring people? I'm more interested in influencing skills, marketing and communication skills, and people who have these soft skills, people who can sell, not just to customers, but internally. If you can't do that, then really you don't actually have a place in my team. There's still the need for the technology. It's not that those have replaced these, it's that those are needed as well as some of these. The you can't's gone. It's about telling people how they can achieve something rather than sitting there on the fence and saying, that provides risk, you can't. So I'd like to finalize up with, I think you need to be able to understand and realize that there has been this almost like the robot in the past, the technical robot, the person who, when every project is released, just sits and says, have you thought about security? That's gone completely. And you need to basically equip yourself and your team. As a head of information security, one of the huge things you need to understand is you're nothing more than a collection of your team. Your team is the most important group of people. Like when it comes round to performance management time, one of the things I tell my team is nothing, we grade from 1 to 6, nothing gives me more pride than being able to give the highest grades I possibly can give. Because that means they've been successful and be able to defend them to the other senior management. So make sure that you build your team and make sure you take all the responsibility you practically can. Don't ask for someone to give you responsibility. Don't ask for responsibility, assume the responsibility. Let someone tell you that you don't have responsibility for that rather than asking or waiting to be asked. And the last thing I want to say is one thing that you can take away today is have a quick review of your job description, especially if you've been in the role for a long time. Because you might find that your job description and your team's job description does not match this person of tomorrow that needs to be there. Are all of the skills, are all of the aspects that you need to be rewarded on are in there? Are they basically focusing on the hard skills, or are they focusing on these soft skills that you actually need to have? And I joke here, actually, that reading InfoSec social media is going to be part of somebody's job. We call it threat intelligence. One of my team calls it sitting on Twitter. It's threat intelligence. I could either buy it from somebody else, because that's all they do. That's all the threat intelligence companies do. And the last point here is, you need to engage. The world only changes if you make a change. And I'm hoping that something in this presentation has resonated. If one thing in this presentation has resonated with each one of you, then I've done a successful job here. Because if you can then say, I want to engage in the world and I want to change, it's all about I. It's about you saying, I want to make this change. And if you can make that change and put a human skin on that robot, then the industry will be a much, much better place tomorrow. Thank you, everybody. I'm going to be around for the next 2 days. My Twitter handle is here if you want to hear any more. That's my email address. And I haven't put my Instagram up there, but it's not really information security. That is information security. My Instagram is much more sort of pictures of interesting things. Thank you, everybody. I hope you have a great time. I'm around for questions after this. We won't do questions here because I appreciate I might be running a little bit to time. Yeah, just come and grab me in the breaks. I'm around. I don't bite. And I hope you had a good time. Thank you, everybody.